Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to jump into the Dungeon Master's Guide and not go to page 121, but go to page 155. This little paragraph begins the section on artifacts and relics. Artifacts and relics, they were one of the most exciting things about AD&D when I really delved into the Dungeon Master's Guide in the early 80s. I really liked the idea of the powerful artifacts and the various powers you could gain from them, and well, they were just a lot of fun to think about. Oh, if I could only have this, if I could only have that. So basically this series is going to be about artifacts and relics in AD&D. Today we're going to take a look at what are artifacts and relics. An artifact is anything manufactured that may or may not have significance. A good example would be if you're on a dig in Egypt and you found a cup, and it's a 5,000-year-old cup. Virtually worthless to the people that used it 5,000 years ago, but because it's been found 5,000 years later, it does have some historical significance, and there are people that are very excited about it. It ends up in museums, that kind of stuff. So that would be an artifact. An artifact in AD&D refers specifically to items that have been manufactured that have vast powers, usually of the gods in some means. A relic, on the other hand, can be an artifact in that it can be a manufactured item, but it also has religious overtones. So more divine magic than arcane magic, if you want to look at it that way. So that to me is the significant difference. Now I know a couple of people are screaming at their TVs saying, no, that's not the correct real world definition. I understand that. Artifact and relic, as defined, are going to be that for this series of videos, because that's kind of how D&D means them. So an artifact would be something like Baba Yaga's hut, where Baba Yaga made up the hut for her living space, but it has significant powers and things, but no particular religious overtones. On the other hand, if you look at the invulnerable coat of Arnd, this was crafted by a high priest and blessed by the gods. So that would be a relic, in my opinion. There is not a significant difference between the two as far as gaming is concerned. There is a significant difference as far as your campaign is concerned. First thing I want to do is caution. Artifacts and relics can be campaign altering, and in fact should be. They should also be the end of a long quest, a very hard fought battle, maybe hidden in a dragon's hoard. You've defeated the dragon after a long hard fought thing, and what do you know, there happens to be an artifact in this vast hoard. I have done that. I have given out some artifacts in my time as a DM, especially in the early 80s. I was fairly, I won't say free with them, but I gave them out more than I tend to anytime after that. Simply because, again, we were new to the game. We were seeing what we could do to kind of push the envelope a little bit and see what the game could and couldn't do. And let's face it, when you get to these various charts, we were all licking our chops. Look at all the powers that are to be had here in these 2.5 pages. So you can end up with really powerful stuff, and this all comes from your artifact or relic. I'm not going to look at the power tables today themselves. I'm going to do that in another video. Today I'm going to be more about what artifacts and relics are. Word of caution, these will change your campaign. They will shape it. They will possibly twist it, depending on what happens. There's the famous online story about the group that found the fabled head of Vecna. You cut off your own head, you put this head in its place, and you gain all these vast powers that Vecna wielded. And the story goes that the players actually fell to fighting over who would have the honor of having their heads cut off, and the head of Vecna put on it, with a couple of players killing each other, one or two players being beheaded and then not having the head attached, and all the while the head was just a goof. Go ahead and Google head of Vecna, you'll find it. That's a great example of a way to twist an artifact and have it kind of work and destroy your party. And in this case, it was just a hoax. It was never at the head of Vecna. It was always just kind of a gag. I love that story. We had artifacts, especially in the early days. We had very powerful artifacts wandering around in our campaign. And sometimes they were fine. Sometimes they took over the campaign entirely. And sometimes it was just bad news. Sometimes the person wielding the artifact had such vast powers that everybody else in the group was just an afterthought. And that can make you feel kind of crummy, especially if you've carved out some hours to play some D&D. You sit down at the table and you get to watch the other guy with the powerful magic item do everything. So when it talks about how artifacts and relics should have side effects, possibly some curses. I'm thinking the One Ring, where You gain the power to turn invisible and learn secrets and such, and there's more powers than we see, of course, from the One Ring. But the downside is you get thrust into basically like a shadow realm. You are corrupted by the ring. The ring wants to get back to its master, so you have to deal with that. So there's a downside of it. Another good example would be the monkey's paw. You gain 3 wishes from a monkey's paw, but the wishes are twisted and perverted to being the worst outcome they can possibly have. It's a great short story. If you haven't read it yet, look it up. Just Google it. The Monkey's Paw. It's a great short story. But those are 2 examples of cursed relics, cursed artifacts. Those, in both cases, would be more artifacts than anything else. So there's an argument for the One Ring to possibly be of religious significance to Sauron. But for my demonstration purposes, those would just be artifacts. But if you looked at the cup and talisman of Al Akbar, those are holy. Those would be a good example of relics. They have divine magic. They were made through the power of the divine or by the divine, and they would then become relic. There's no significant gaming difference between the two beyond your story. If you're doing a relic, it's important that the religion be depicted and your players interact like that. But for purposes of these charts, it doesn't really make a difference. I have been a DM who has given out some artifacts. I've been a DM who has purposely destroyed a few artifacts. And I've been a player at a table where some artifacts kind of took over, and then others that I didn't even know the other player had until late in the game. All of a sudden he used the power off of it, and we all realized, hey, that guy's been walking around with an artifact. It depends on how it's played. It depends on, as importantly, on how it's DM'd. So be very careful with artifacts. They can shape and twist your game, and in some cases can really break it. So you've got to be careful with the powers of the artifacts and relics. But in this series, I'm going to take a look at several of these, not every one of them, and talk about how I've dealt with them either as a player who had an artifact, or a player in a game where another player had an artifact, or as a DM who's given out artifacts. And 1 or 2 that I've made up on my own that kind of become, little mini artifacts, if you will. I like throwing out lesser artifacts, very weak artifacts, but that's still not something I do very often. But so that's really going to be the thrust of this series of videos. The other thing is, you're screaming, wait a minute, there's a book of artifacts that came out in about 92 or 93. Why the heck aren't you featuring that? Well, the answer to that is I have taken a look at that book on the channel. I looked at it a couple of years ago. You're welcome to find that video and take a look at it. But I want to capture the flavor of the original AD&D artifacts, and the only way to do that is to go through the DMG. So that's all I'm going to take a look at today on artifacts and relics. We'll talk about kind of their malevolent side, that sort of thing. In future videos, we'll also talk about the powers, and then, of course, individual artifacts and how you could roll for the powers and that sort of stuff. So that's what this is going to be. Let me know what you think, if this format is going to be something that you like. I realize the first video is hard to tell, but let me know what you think about it. Let me know any stories you've had with artifacts at your table. And as we go along, I'm sure there'll be more and more. For instance, I had given out Baba Yaga's hut in one of my old games. That player stopped playing in the spring of '83 with us, unfortunately. Life changed and he wasn't available anymore. And it's a shame, because Baba Yaga's hut ended up being a really good artifact for the group to have. The only power I remember it having was it could throw a 12-dice lightning bolt, which I think might even be in the actual description. But we'll look into that when we look at the actual hut itself. Baba Yaga's hut probably has gotten some of the most attention of any artifact. It's had a long D&D or Long Dragon article on it back in around issue 80 or 83, and of course a D&D module. It's a nice artifact, and it's one that really shaped in a lot of my game back in the early 80s. I was very sad when the player ended up leaving the group and we kind of lost that artifact. But that's all I've got today on page 121. Let me know what you think, how artifacts and relics have shaped your campaign. Please take the time to like and subscribe. If you haven't already, leave comments below. Take a look at the Patreon, see if you can help me out there. But that's all I've got today on page 121. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.